Magic in ancient Egypt. Magic pattern. Practical Egyptian magic. The history and theory. The HERMES TRIGMEGISTUS7 sources. Mythological view. Part 3. Greek philosophy and Egyptian law really came together at the time of the Lagides, who gradually made Alexandria the intellectual, scientific, philosophic and religious center of the Hellenistic world. In fact, the clear thinking of Greek logic served to peel away quite a few of the outer layers that had accumulated in the Egyptian system over the centuries, bringing it much nearer to the original than, say, the occultism of the Theban or Middle period. Manetho, the Egyptian priest of Heliopolis, was also famous for translating the mysteries into Greek. He lived during the final years of the 4th and first half of the 3rd centuries BC.I in the reign of the last two Ptolemies. As far as this inquiry is concerned, one fragment of writing that has come down to us is of considerable importance, and we owe its preservation to one Georgius Cincelus. It is stated to be taken from a work of Manetho, entitled Suthes, that has otherwise entirely disappeared. The passage with the introductory sentence of the monk Cincelus runs as follows. It is proposed then to make a few extracts concerning the Egyptian dynasties from the books of Manetho. This Manetho, being high priest of the heathen temples in Egypt, based his replies to King Ptolemy on the monuments which lay in the Syriadic country. These monuments, he tells us, were engraved in the sacred language and in the characters of the sacred writing by Thoth, the first Hermes. After the flood they were translated from the sacred language into the then common tongue, but still written in hieroglyphic characters, and stored away in books by the good Daimones and the second Hermes, father of Tat, in the inner chambers of the temples of Egypt. There is a lot more in this document, and for those interested I would recommend the Mede translation. The references to a land of enlightened people that existed before the flood, and to the fact that Thoth/Hermes and the other gods came from such a country, are numerous and leave little doubt in any open mind as to where the Egyptians gained their occult knowledge. It is interesting, also, to note that the old truths were translated from the tongue of the mother country into the native Egyptian and no doubt suffered not only in translation, but in subsequent analysis by later generations of scholars to whom the whole pre-flood story was little more than an historical fable. Suthes is another name for Sirius, which brings us to the next piece of information from this stable. References to the Syriadic land have confused more conventionally inclined scholars, who claim that there is no historical record of a Syriadic land or country. Mede states, in the astronomical science of the Egyptians, the most conspicuous solar system near our own, represented in the heavens by the brilliant Sirius, was of supreme interest. Cycles of immense importance were determined by it, and it entered into the highest mysticism of Egyptian initiation. Sirius was the guardian star of Egypt, its rising greatly affecting the life of everyday folk through the yearly inundation from the Nile. As the basis of this cycle of inundation was Suthiac or Siriadic, Sirius Sirios, being called in the Greek transliteration Suthes, and Seth e.g., Sept, it surely stands to reason that Egypt was the Syriadic land. In antiquity there were constant references to the Pillars of Hermes, or Mercury columnae, from which many of the ancient writers claim to have gathered their information. The historian Ammianus Marcellinus, friend of the Emperor Julian, has preserved some information which is certainly of interest. It runs as follows. There are certain underground galleries and passages full of windings, which, it is said, the adepts in the ancient rites, knowing that the flood was coming, and fearing that the memory of the sacred ceremonies would be obliterated, constructed in various places, distributed in the interior of the buildings, which were mined out with great labor. And leveling the walls, they engraved on them numerous kinds of birds and animals, and countless varieties of creatures of another world, which they called hieroglyphic characters. Thick characters. A highly significant passage from the Hermetic texts appears in the writings of one Sanchuniathon, who is described by Philo as a man of great learning and a busy searcher after knowledge, who especially desired to know the first principles from which all things are derived. Philo continues to inform us that Sanchuniathon most carefully examined the books oft out, for he knew that Taot was the first of all under the sun, who discovered the use of letters and the writing of records. So he started from him, making him as it were his foundation, from him the Logos whom the Egyptians call Thoth, the Alexandrians Thoth, but whom the Greeks have turned into Hermes. The paragraphs relating to the creation are of particular interest, and far removed from the primitive thinking normally associated with other indigenous peoples of the African continent. I feel they are worthy of detailed quotation. He, Thoth, supposes the beginning of all things to consist of a dark mist of a spiritual nature, or as it were, a breath of dark mist, a endi of a turbid chaos black as Erebus. That these were boundless, a endi for many an age remained without a bound. But when, he says, the spirit fell in love with its own principles, and they were interbonded, that interweaving was called love, and this love was the origin of the creation of all things. But chaos did not know its own creation. From its embrace with spirit Mot was born. From Hermo, the great mother, it was that every seed of the creation came, the birth of all the cosmic bodies. First of all, there were great lives devoid of sensation, and out of these came subsequently great lives possessed of intelligence. The latter were called Sophisemen, that is to say, overseers of the heavens. The latter were fashioned in the form of eggs, and shone forth as Mot, the sun and moon, the stars and the great planetary spheres. Now as the original nebula began to lighten, through its heat, mists and clouds of sea and earth were produced, and gigantic downpours and torrents of the waters in the firmaments. Even after they were separated, they were still carried from their proper places by the heat of the sun, and all the watery and earthy elements met together again in the nebula one with the other, and dashed together amid thunder and lightning, and over the crash of the thundering and the great rational lives before mentioned watched, while on the land and sea male and female cowered at their echo, and were dismayed.